Yi Ruk, translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 18. The Grateful Ghost. It is often told that in the days of the Koryo dynasty, A.D. 918 to 1392, when an examination was to be held, a certain scholar came from a far distant part of the country to take part. Once on his journey the day was drawing to a close, and he found himself among the mountains. Suddenly he heard a sneezing from among the creepers and bushes by the roadside, but could see no one. Thinking it strange, he dismounted from his horse, went into the brake, and listened. He heard it again, and it seemed to come from the roots of the creeper close beside him. So he ordered his servant to dig round it and see. He dug and found a dead man's skull. It was full of earth, and the roots of the creeper had passed through the nostrils. The sneezing was caused by the annoyance felt by the spirit from having the nose so discommoded. The candidate felt sorry, washed the skull in clean water, wrapped it in paper, and reburied it in its former place on the hillside. He also brought a table of food and offered sacrifice and said a prayer. That night in a dream a scholar came to him, an old man with white hair, who bowed, thanked him, and said, "On account of sin committed in a former life, I died out of season, before I had fulfilled my days. My posterity, too, were all destroyed, my body crumbled back into the dust, my skull alone remaining, and that is what you found below the creeper. On account of the root passing through it, the annoyance was great, and I could not help but sneeze. By good luck, you and your kind heart, blessed of heaven, took pity on me, buried me in a clean place, and gave me food. Your kindness is greater than the mountains, and like the blessing that first brought me into life. Though my soul is by no means perfect, yet I long for some way by which to requite your favor, and so I have exercised my powers in your behalf. Your present journey is for the purpose of trying the official examination, so I shall tell you beforehand what the form is to be, and the subject. It is to be of character groups of fives, in couplets. The rhyme sound is pong, and the subject, peaks and spires of the summer clouds. I have already composed one for you, which, if you care to use it, will undoubtedly win you the first place. It is this. The white sun rode high up in the heavens, and the floating clouds formed a lofty peak. The priest who saw them asked if there was a temple there, and the crane lamented the fact that no pines were visible. But the lightnings from the cloud were the flashings of the woodman's axe, and the muffled thunders were the bell calls of the holy temple. Will any say that the hills do not move? On the sunset breezes they sailed away. After thus stating it, he bowed and took his departure. The man, in wonder, awakened from his dream, came up to Seoul, and behold, the subject was as foretold by the spirit. He wrote what had been given him, and became first in the honors of the occasion. Im Bang. End of chapter 18. Translated by James S. Gale. The Plucky Maiden. Han Myong Hoi. We are told in the Yol Ryok Kyu Sul that when Han was a boy he had for protector and friend a tiger, who used to accompany him as a dog does his master. One evening, when he started off into the hills, he heard the distant tramp of the great beast, who had got scent of his going, and had come rushing after him. When Han saw him, he turned and said, "Good old chap, you come all this distance to be my friend. I love you for it." The tiger prostrated himself and nodded with his head several times. He used to accompany Han all through the nights, but when the day dawned he would leave him. Han later fell into bad company, grew fond of drink, and was one of the boisterous companions of King Sejo. The story. Han Myong Hoi was a renowned minister of the reign of Sejo, A.D. 1455 to 1468. The king appreciated and enjoyed him greatly, and there was no one of the court who could surpass him for influence and royal favor. Confident in his position, Han did as he pleased, wielding absolute power. At that time, like grass before the wind, the world bowed at his coming. No one dared utter a word of remonstrance. When Han went as governor to Pyong an province, he did all manner of lawless things. Anyone daring to cross his wishes in the least was dealt with by torture and death. The whole province feared him as they would a tiger. On a certain day Governor Han, hearing that the deputy prefect of Son Chan had a very beautiful daughter, called the deputy and said, "I hear that you have a very beautiful daughter, whom I would like to make my concubine. When I am on my official rounds shortly, I shall expect to stop at your town and take her, so be ready for me." The deputy, alarmed, said, "How can your Excellency say that your servant's contemptible daughter is beautiful? Someone has reported her wrongly. But since you so command, how can I do but accede gladly?" So he bowed, said his farewell, and went home. On his return his family noticed that his face was clouded with anxiety, and the daughter asked why it was. "Did the governor call you, father?" asked she, "and why are you so anxious? Tell me, please." At first, fearing that she would be disturbed, he did not reply, but her repeated questions forced him, so that he said, "I am in trouble on your account," and then told of how the governor wanted her for his concubine. "If I had refused, I would have been killed, so I yielded. But a gentleman's daughter being made a concubine is a disgrace unheard of." The daughter made light of it and laughed. "Why did you not think it out better than that, father? Why should a grown man lose his life for the sake of a girl? Let the daughter go. By losing one daughter and saving your life, you surely do better than saving your daughter and losing your life. One can easily see where the greater advantage lies. A daughter does not count. Give her over, that's all. Don't for a moment think otherwise. Just put away your distress and anxiety. We women, every one of us, are under the ban, and such things are decreed by fate. I shall accept without any opposition, so please have no anxiety. It is settled now, and you, father, must yield and follow. If you do, so all will be well." The father sighed and said in reply, "Since you seem so willing, my mind is somewhat relieved." But from this time on the whole house was in distress. The girl alone seemed perfectly unmoved, not showing the slightest sign of fear. She laughed as usual, her light and happy laugh, and her actions seemed wonderfully free. In a little the governor reached Son Chon on his rounds. He then called the deputy and said, "Make ready your daughter for to-morrow and all things needed." The deputy came home and made preparation for the so-called wedding. The daughter said, "This is not a real wedding. It is only the taking of a concubine. But still, make everything ready in the way of refreshments and ceremony as for a real marriage." So the father did as she requested. On the day following the governor came to the house of the deputy. He was not dressed in his official robes, but came simply in the dress and hat of a commoner. When he went into the inner quarters he met the daughter. She stood straight before him. Her two hands were lifted in ceremonial form, but instead of holding a fan to hide her face, she held a sword before her. She was very pretty. He gave a great start of surprise, and asked the meaning of the knife that she held. She ordered her nurse to reply, who said, "Even though I am an obscure countrywoman, I do not forget that I am born of the gentry. And though your Excellency is a high minister of state, still to take me by force is an unheard of dishonor. If you take me as your real and true wife, I'll serve you with all my heart. But if you are determined to take me as a concubine, I shall die now by this sword. For that reason I hold it. My life rests on one word from your Excellency. Speak it, please, before I decide." The governor, though a man who observed no ceremony and never brooked a question, when he saw how beautiful and how determined this maiden was, fell a victim to her at once, and said, "If you so decide, then of course I'll make you my real wife." Her answer was, "If you truly mean it, then please withdraw and write out the certificate, send the gifts, provide the goose, Dress in the proper way. Come and let us go through the required ceremony, drink the pledge glass, and wed." The governor did as she suggested, carried out the forms to the letter, and they were married. She was not only a very pretty woman, but upright and true of soul, a rare person indeed. The governor took her home, loved her, and held her dear. He had, however, a real wife before, and concubines, but he set them all aside and fixed his affections on this one only. She remonstrated with him over his wrongs and unrighteous acts, and he listened and made improvement. The world took note of it, and praised her as a true and wonderful woman. She counted herself the real wife, but the first wife treated her as a concubine, and all the relatives said likewise that she could never be considered a real wife. At that time King Se jo frequently, in the dress of a commoner, used to visit Han's house. Han entertained him royally with refreshments, which his wife used to bring and offer before him. He called her his little sister. On a certain day King Se jo, as he was accustomed, came to the house, and while he was drinking, he suddenly saw the woman fall on her face before him. The king in surprise inquired as to what she could possibly mean by such an act. She then told all the story of her being taken by force and brought to Seoul. She wept while she said, "Though I am from a far distant part of the country, I am of the gentry by ancestry, and my husband took me with all the required ceremonies of a wife, so that I ought not to be counted a concubine. But there is no law in this land by which a second real wife may be taken after a first real wife exists, so they call me a concubine, a matter of deepest disgrace. Please, your Majesty, take pity on me and decide my case." The king laughed and said, "This is a simple matter to settle. Why should my little sister make so great an affair of it, and bow before me? I will decide your case at once. Come." He then wrote out with his own hand a document making her a real wife, and her children eligible for the highest office. He wrote it, signed it, stamped it, and gave it to her. From that time on she was known as a real wife, in rank and standing equal to the first one. No further word was ever slightingly spoken, and her children shared in the affairs of state. Im Bang. End of chapter 19.
Resourceful wife. In the last year of Yonsan, terrible evils were abroad among the people. Such wickedness as the world had never seen before was perpetrated, of which His Majesty was the evil genius. He even gave orders to his eunuchs and underlings to bring to him any woman of special beauty that they might see in the homes of the highest nobility, and whoever pleased him he used as his own. "Never mind objections," said he. "Take them by force and come." Such were his orders. No one escaped him. He even went so far as to publish abroad that Minister So and So's wife preferred him to her husband, and would like to live always in the palace. It was the common talk of the city, and people were dumbfounded. For that reason all hearts forsook him, and because of this he was dethroned, and King Chongjang reigned in his stead. In these days of trouble there was a young wife of a certain minister, who was very beautiful in form and face. One day it fell about that she was ordered into the palace. Other women, when called, would cry and behave as though their lives were forfeited, but this young woman showed not the slightest sign of fear. She dressed and went straight into the palace. King Yonsan saw her and ordered her to come close to him. She came, and then in a sudden manner the most terrible odor imaginable was noticeable. The king held his fan before his face, turned aside, spat, and said, "Dear me, I cannot stand this one. Take her away." And so she escaped undefiled. How it came about was thus. She knew that she was likely to be called at any moment, and so had planned a ruse by which to escape. 2 slices of meat she had kept constantly on hand, decayed and foul-smelling, but always ready. She placed these under her arms as she dressed, and went into the palace, and so provided this awful and unaccountable odor. All that knew of it praised her bravery and sagacity. Imbang. End of chapter 20. Recording by Ezwa in Belgium in July 2016.
Yi Ryuk, translated by James S. Gale. 21. The Boxed-Up Governor. A certain literary official was at one time governor of the city of Kyongju. Whenever he visited the mayor of the place, it was his custom, on seeing dancing girls, to tap them on the head with his pipe and say, "These girls are devils, ogres, goblins. How can you tolerate them in your presence?" Naturally, those who heard this disliked him, and the mayor himself detested his behavior and manners. He sent a secret message to the dancing girls, saying, "If any of you, by any means whatever, can deceive this governor and put him to shame, I'll reward you richly." Among them there was one girl, a mere child, who said she could. The governor resided in the quarter of the city where the Confucian temple was, and he had but one servant with him, a young lad. The dancing girl who had decided to ensnare him, in the dress of a common woman of the town, used frequently to go by the main gateway of the temple, and in going would call the governor's boy to her. Sometimes she showed her profile, and sometimes she showed her whole form, as she stood in the gateway. The boy would go out to her, and she would speak to him for a moment or two, and then go. She came sometimes once a day, sometimes twice, and this she kept up for a long time. The governor at last inquired of the boy as to who this woman was that came so frequently to call him. "She is my sister," said the boy. "Her husband went away on a peddling round a year or so ago, and has not yet returned. Consequently she has no one else to help her, so she frequently calls and confers with me." One evening, when the boy had gone to eat his meal, and the governor was alone, the woman came to the main gateway, and called for the boy. His Excellency answered for him and invited her in. When she came, she blushed and appeared very diffident, standing modestly aside. The governor said, "My boy is absent just now, but I want a smoke. Go and get a light for my pipe, will you please?" She brought the light, and then he said, "Sit down too, and smoke a little, won't you?" She replied, "How could I dare do such a thing?" He said, "There is no one else here now. Never mind." There being no help for it, she did as he bade her, and smoked a little. He felt his heart suddenly inclined in her favor, and he said, "I have seen many beautiful women, but I surely think that you are the prettiest of them all. Once seeing you, I have quite forgotten how to eat or sleep. Could you not come to me to live here? I am quite alone, and no one will know it." She pretended to be greatly scandalized. "Your Excellency is a noble, and I am a low-class woman. How can you think of such a thing? Do you mean it as a joke?" He replied, "I mean it truly, no joke at all." He swore an oath, saying, "Really, I mean it, every word." She then said, "Since you speak so, I am really very grateful, and shall come." Said he, "Meeting you thus is wonderful indeed." She went on to say, "There is another matter, however, that I wish to call to your attention. I understand that where your Excellency is now staying is a very sacred place, and that according to ancient law men were forbidden to have women here. Is that true?" The governor clapped her shoulder and said, "Well, really now, how is it that you know of this? You are right. What shall we do about it?" She made answer, "If you'll depend on me, I'll arrange a plan. My home is near by, and I am also alone, So if you come quietly at night to me, we can meet and no one will know. I shall send a felt hat by the boy, and you can wear that for disguise. With this commoner's felt hat on, no one will know you." The governor was greatly delighted and said, "How is it that you can plan so wonderfully? I shall do as you suggest. Now you be sure to be on hand." He repeated this 2 or 3 times. The woman went and entered the house indicated. When evening came she sent the hat by the boy. The governor arrived as agreed, and she received him, lit the lamp, and brought him refreshments and drink. They talked and drank together, and he called her to come to him. The woman hesitated for a moment, when suddenly there was a call heard from the outside, and a great disturbance took place. She bent her head to listen, and then gave a cry of alarm, saying, "That's the voice of my husband who has come. I was unfortunate, and so had this miserable wretch apportioned to my lot. He is the most despicable among mortals. For murder and arson he has no equal. 3 years ago he left me, and I took another husband, and we've had nothing to do with each other since. I can't imagine why he should come now. He is evidently very drunk, too, from the sound of his voice. Your Excellency has really fallen into a terrible plight. What shall I do?" The woman went out then and answered, saying, "Who comes thus at midnight to make such a disturbance?" The voice replied, "Don't you know my voice? Why don't you open the door?" She answered, "Are you not Cholo (Brass Tiger), and have we not separated for good years ago? Why have you come?" The voice from without answered back, "Your leaving me and taking another man has always been a matter of deepest resentment on my part. I have something special to say to you," and he pounded the door open and came thundering in. The woman rushed back into the room, saying, "Your Excellency must escape in some way or other." In such a little thatched hut there was no place possible for concealment but an empty rice box only. "Please get into this," said she, and she lifted the lid and hurried him in. The governor, in his haste and déshabillé, was bundled into the box. He then heard from within this fellow come into the room and quarrel with his wife. She said, "We have been separated 3 years already. What reason have you to come now and make such a disturbance?" Said he, "You cast me off and took another man, therefore I have come for the clothes that I left and the other things that belong to me." Then she threw out his belongings to him, but he said, pointing to the box, "That's mine." She replied, "That's not yours. I bought that myself with 2 rolls of silk goods." "But," said he, "one of those rolls I gave you, and I'm not going to let you have it." "Even though you did give it, do you mean to say that for 1 roll of silk you will carry away this box? I'll not consent to it." Thus they quarrelled and contradicted each other. "If you don't give me the box," said he, "I'll enter a suit against you at the mayor's." A little later the day dawned, and so he had the box carried off to the mayor's office to have the case decided by law, while the woman followed. When they entered the court, already the mayor was seated in the judgment place, and here they presented their case concerning the box. The mayor, after hearing, decided thus: "Since you each have a half share in its purchase, there is nothing for me to do but to divide it between you. Bring a saw," said he. The servants brought the saw and began on the box, when suddenly from the inner regions came forth the cry, "Save me! Oh, save me!" The mayor, in pretended astonishment, said, "Why, there's a man's voice from the inside," and ordered that it should be opened. The servants managed to find the key, and at last the lid came back, and from the inner quarters there came forth a half-dressed man. On seeing him the whole place was put into convulsions of laughter, for it was none other than the governor. "How is it that your Excellency finds yourself in this box in this unaccountable way?" asked the mayor. "Please come out." The governor, huddling himself together as well as he could, climbed on to the open veranda. He held his head down and nearly died for shame. The mayor, splitting his sides with laughter, ordered clothes to be brought, and the first thing that came was a woman's green dress coat. The governor hastily turned it inside out, slipped it on, and made a dash for his quarters in the Confucian Temple. That day he left the place never to return, and even to the present time in Kyong ju they laugh and tell the story of the boxed-up governor. Im Bang. End of chapter 21.
Rook, translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 22. The Man Who Lost His Legs. There was a merchant in Chongju who used to go to Quelpart to buy seaweed. One time, when he drew up on the shore, he saw a man shuffling along on the ground toward the boat. He crept nearer, and at last took hold of the side with both his hands and jumped in. "When I looked at him," said the merchant, "I found he was an old man without any legs. Astonished, I asked, saying, 'How is it, old man, that you have lost your legs?' He said in reply, 'I lost my legs on a trip once when I was shipwrecked, and a great fish bit them off.' 'However did that happen?' inquired the merchant. And the old man said, 'We were caught in a gale and driven till we touched on some island or other. Before us on the shore stood a high castle with a great gateway. The 20 or so of us who were together in the storm-tossed boat were all exhausted from cold and hunger, and lying exposed. We landed and managed to go together to the house. There was in it one man only, whose height was terrible to behold, and whose chest was many spans round. His face was black, and his eyes large and rolling. His voice was like the braying of a monster donkey. Our people made motions showing that they wanted something to eat. The man made no reply, but securely fastened the front gate. After this he brought an armful of wood, put it in the middle of the courtyard, and there made a fire. When the fire blazed up, he rushed after us, and caught a young lad, one of our company, cooked him before our eyes, pulled him to pieces, and ate him. We were all reduced to a state of horror, not knowing what to do. We gazed at each other in dismay and stupefaction. When he had eaten his fill, he went up into a veranda and opened a jar, from which he drank some kind of spirit. After drinking it, he uttered the most gruesome and awful noises. His face grew very red, and he lay down and slept. His snorings were like the roarings of the thunder. We planned then to make our escape, and so tried to open the large gate. But one leaf was about 24 feet across, and so thick and heavy that with all our strength we could not move it. The walls, too, were 150 feet high, and so we could do nothing with them. We were like fish in a pot, beyond all possible way of escape. We held each other's hands and cried. Among us, one man thought of this plan. We had a knife, and he took it, and while the monster was drunk and asleep, decided to stab his eyes out and cut his throat. We said in reply, "We are all doomed to death, anyway. Let's try." And we made our way up onto the veranda and stabbed his eyes. He gave an awful roar and struck out on all sides to catch us. We rushed here and there, making our escape out of the court back into the rear garden. There were in this enclosure pigs and sheep, about 60 of them in all. There we rushed, in among the pigs and sheep. He floundered about, waving his arms after us, but not one of us did he get hold of. We were all mixed up, sheep, pigs, and people. When he did catch anything, it was a sheep, and when it was not a sheep, it was a pig. So he opened the front gate to send all the animals out. We then, each of us, took a pig or sheep on the back, and made straight for the gate. The monster felt each, and finding it a pig or a sheep, let it go. Thus we all got out and rushed for the boat. A little later he came and sat on the bank, and roared his threatenings at us. A lot of other giants came at his call. They took steps of 30 feet or so, came racing after us, caught the boat, and made it fast. But we took axes and struck at the hands that held it, and so got free at last, and out to the open sea. Again a great wind arose, and we ran on to the rocks, and were all destroyed. Every one was engulfed in the sea and drowned. I alone got hold of a piece of boat timber and lived. Then there was a horrible fish from the sea that came swimming after me, and bit off my legs. At last I drifted back home, and here I am. When I think of it still, my teeth are cold and my bones shiver. My 8 lucky stars are very bad. That's why it happened to me. Anonymous. End of chapter 22.
Chapter 23. 10,000 Devils. Han Chun-kyom was the son of a provincial secretary. He matriculated in the year 1579 and graduated in 1586. He received the last wishes of King Sonjo and sat by his side, taking notes for 7 hours. From 1608 to 1623 he was generalissimo of the army, and later was raised to the rank of prince. A certain Prince Han of Chung Chong province had a distant relative who was an uncouth countryman living in extreme poverty. This relative came to visit him from time to time. Han pitied his cold and hungry condition, gave him clothes to wear, and shared his food, urging him to stay and to prolong his visit often into several months. He felt sorry for him, but disliked his uncouthness and stupidity. On one of these visits, the poor relation suddenly announced his intention to return home, although the New Year's season was just at hand. Han urged him to remain, saying, "It would be better for you to be comfortably housed at my home, eating cake and soup and enjoying quiet sleep, rather than riding through wind and weather at this season of the year." He said at first that he would have to go, until his host so insistently urged on him to stay that at last he yielded and gave consent. At New Year's Eve he remarked to Prince Han, "I am possessor of a peculiar kind of magic, by which I have under my control all manner of evil genii, and New Year is the season at which I call them up, run over their names, and inspect them. If I did not do so, I should lose control altogether, and there would follow no end of trouble among mortals. It is a matter of no small moment, and that is why I wish to go. Since, however, you have detained me, I shall have to call them up in your Excellency's house and look them over. I hope you will not object." Han was greatly astonished and alarmed, but gave his consent. The poor relation went on to say further, "This is an extremely important matter, and I would like to have for it your central guest hall." Han consented to this also. So that night they washed the floors and scoured them clean. The relation also sat himself with all dignity facing the south, while Prince Han took up his station on the outside, prepared to spy. Soon he saw a startling variety of demons crushing in at the door, horrible in appearance and awesome of manner. They lined up one after another, and still another, and another, till they filled the entire court, each bowing as he came before the master, who at this point drew out a book, opened it before him, and began calling off the names. Demon guards who stood by the threshold repeated the call and checked off the names just as they do in a government yamen. From the second watch it went on till the 5th of the morning. Han remarked, "It was indeed no lie when he told me 10,000 devils." One latecomer arrived after the marking was over, and still another came climbing over the wall. The man ordered them to be arrested, and inquiry made of them under the paddle. The late arrival said, "I really have had a hard time of it of late to live, and so was obliged, in order to find anything, to inject smallpox into the home of a scholar who lives in Yongnam. It is a long way off, and so I have arrived too late for the roll call. A serious fault indeed, I confess." The one who climbed the wall said, "I, too, have known want and hunger, and so had to insert a little typhus into the family of a gentleman who lives in Kyongki. But hearing that roll call was due, I came helter-skelter, fearing lest I should arrive too late, and so climbed the wall, which was indeed a sin." The man then, in a loud voice, rated them soundly, saying, "These devils have disobeyed my orders, caused disease, and sinned grievously. Worse than everything, they have climbed the wall of a high official's house. He ordered 100 blows to be given them with the paddle, the kang to be put on, and to have them locked fast in prison. Then, calling the others to him, he said, "Do not spread disease. Do you understand?" 3 times he ordered it, and 5 times he repeated it. Then they were all dismissed. The crowd of devils lined off before him, taking their departure and crushing out through the gate with no end of noise and confusion. After a long time, they had all disappeared. Prince Han, looking on during this time, saw the man now seated alone in the hall. It was quiet, and all had vanished. The cocks crew, and morning came. Han was astonished above measure, and asked as to the law that governs such work as this. The poor relation said in reply, "When I was young, I studied in a monastery in the mountains. In that monastery was an old priest who had a most peculiar countenance. A man feeble and ready to die, he seemed. All the priests made sport of him, and treated him with contempt. I alone had pity on his age, and often gave him up my food, and always treated him kindly. One evening, when the moon was bright, the old priest said to me, 'There is a cave behind this monastery, from which a beautiful view may be had. Will you not come with me and share it?' I went with him, and when we crossed the ridge of the hills into the stillness of the night, he drew a book from his breast and gave it to me, saying, 'I, who am old and ready to die, have here a great secret, which I have long wished to pass on to someone worthy. I have travelled over the wide length of Korea, and have never found the man till now I meet you, and my heart is satisfied, so please receive it.' I opened the book and found it a catalogue list of devils, with magic writing interspersed, and an explanation of the laws that govern the spirit world. The old priest wrote out one magic recipe, and having set fire to it, countless devils at once assembled, at which I was greatly alarmed. He then sat with me and called over the names one after another, and said to the devils, 'I am an old man now, am going away, and so am about to put you under the care of this young man. Obey him, and all will be well.' I already had the book, and so called them to me, read out the new orders, and dismissed them. The old priest and I returned to the temple and went to sleep. I awoke early next morning and went to call on him, but he was gone. Thus I came into the possession of the magic art, and have possessed it for a score of years and more. What the world knows nothing of, I have thus made known to your Excellency." Han was astonished beyond measure, and asked, "May I not also come into possession of this wonderful gift?" The man replied, "Your Excellency has great ability and can do wonderful things, but the possessor of this craft must be one poor and despised and of no account. For you, a minister, it would never do." The next day he left suddenly, and returned no more. Han sent a servant with a message to him. The servant, with great difficulty, at last found him alone among 1,000 mountain peaks, living in a little straw hut no bigger than a cockle shell. No neighbours were there, nor anyone beside. He called him, but he refused to come. He sent another messenger to invite him, but he had moved away, and no trace of him was left. Prince Han's children had heard the story from himself, and I, the writer, received it from them. Im Bang. End of chapter 23.
Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 24. The Home of the Fairies. In the days of King In-jo, 1623 to 1649, there was a student of Confucius who lived in Kapyong. He was still a young man and unmarried. His education had not been extensive, for he had only read a little in the way of history and literature. For some reason or other, he left his home and went into Gangwon province. Traveling on horseback and with a servant, he reached a mountain, where he was overtaken by rain that wet him through. Mysteriously, for some unknown cause, his servant suddenly died, and the man, in fear and distress, drew the body to the side of the hill where he left it, and went on his way weeping. When he had gone but a short distance, the horse he rode fell under him and died also. Such was his plight, his servant dead, his horse dead, rain falling fast, and the road an unknown one. He did not know what to do or where to go, and reduced thus to walking, he broke down and cried. At this point there met him an old man with very wonderful eyes, and his hair as white as snow. He asked the young man why he wept, and the reply was that his servant was dead, his horse was dead, and that it was raining, and that he did not know the way. The patriarch, on hearing this, took pity on him, and lifting his staff pointed, saying, "There is a house yonder, just beyond those pines. Follow that stream, and it will bring you to where there are people." The young man looked as directed, and a li or so beyond he saw a clump of trees. He bowed, thanked the stranger, and started on his way. When he had gone a few paces, he looked back, but the friend had disappeared. Greatly wondering, he went on toward the place indicated, and as he drew near, he saw a grove of pines, huge as they were, a whole forest of them. Bamboos appeared, too, in countless numbers, with a wide stream of water flowing by. Underneath the water there seemed to be a marble flooring like a great pavement, white and pure. As he went along, he saw that the water was all of an even depth, such as one could cross easily. A mile or so farther on, he saw a beautifully decorated house. The pillars and entrance approaches were perfect in form. He continued on his way, wet as he was, carrying his thorn staff, and entered the gate and sat down to rest. It was paved, too, with marble, and smooth as polished glass. There were no chinks or creases in it. All of it was of one perfect surface. In the room was a marble table, and on it a copy of the Book of Changes. There was also a brazier of jade just in front. Incense was burning in it, and the fragrance filled the room. Besides these, nothing else was visible. The rain had ceased, and all was quiet and clear, with no wind or anything to disturb. The world of confusion seemed to have receded from him. While he sat there looking in astonishment, he suddenly heard the sound of footfalls from the rear of the building. Startled by it, he turned to see, when an old man appeared. He looked as though he might equal the turtle or the crane as to age, and was very dignified. He wore a green dress and carried a jade staff of 9 sections. The appearance of the old man was such as to stun any inhabitant of the earth. He recognized him as the master of the place, and so he went forward and made a low obeisance. The old man received him kindly and said, "I am the master, and have long waited for you." He took him by the hand and led him away. As they went along, the hills grew more and more enchanting, while the soft breezes and the light touched him with mystifying favor. Suddenly, as he looked, the man was gone. So he went on by himself and arrived soon at another palace built likewise of precious stones. It was a great hall, stretching on into the distance as far as the eye could see. The young man had seen the royal palace frequently when in Seoul, attending examinations, but compared with this, the royal palace was as a mud hut thatched with straw. As he reached the gate, a man in ceremonial robes received him and led him in. He passed 2 or 3 pavilions, and at last reached a special one, and went up to the upper story. There, reclining at the table, he saw the ancient sage whom he had met before. Again he bowed. This young man, brought up poorly in the country, was never accustomed to seeing or dealing with the great. In fear, he did not dare lift his eyes. The ancient master, however, again welcomed him and asked him to be seated, saying, "This is not the dusty world that you are accustomed to, but the abode of the genii. I knew you were coming, and so was waiting to receive you." He turned and called, saying, "Bring something for the guest to eat." In a little, a servant brought a richly laden table. It was such fare as was never seen on earth, and there was abundance of it. The young man, hungry as he was, ate heartily of these strange viands. Then the dishes were carried away, and the old man said, I have a daughter who has arrived at the marriageable age, and I have been trying to find a son-in-law, but as yet have not succeeded. Your coming accords with this need. Live here, then, and become my son-in-law. The young man, not knowing what to think, bowed and was silent. Then the host turned and gave an order, saying, Call in the children. 2 boys, about 12 or 13 years of age, came running in and sat down beside him. Their faces were so beautifully white, and they seemed like jewels. The master pointed to them and said to the guest, These are my sons. And to the sons he said, This young man is he whom I have chosen for my son-in-law. When should we have the wedding? Choose you a lucky day and let me know. The 2 boys reckoned over the days on their fingers, and then together said, The day after tomorrow is a lucky day. The old man, turning to the strangers, said, That decides as to the wedding, and now you must wait in the guest chamber till the time arrives. He then gave a command to call so-and-so. In a little, an official of the genie came forward, dressed in light and airy garments. His appearance and expression were very beautiful. A man, he seemed, of glad and happy mien. The master said, Show this young man the way to his apartments, and treat him well till the time of the wedding. The official then led the way, and the young man bowed and left the room. When he had passed outside the gate, a red sedan chair was in waiting for him. He was asked to mount. 8 bearers bore him smoothly along. A mile or so distant, they reached another palace equally wonderful, with no speck or flaw of any kind to mar its beauty. Its graceful groves of flowers and trees he descended to enter his pavilion. Beautiful garments were taken from jeweled boxes, and a perfumed bath was given him, and a change made. Thus he laid aside his weather-beaten clothes and donned the vestments of the genie. The official remained as company for him till the appointed time. When that day arrived, other beautiful robes were brought, and again he bathed and changed. When he was dressed, he mounted the palanquin and rode the palace of the master, 20 or more officials accompanying. On arrival, a guide directed them to the special palace beautiful. Here he saw preparations for the wedding, and here he made his bow. This finished, he moved as directed, further in. The tinkling sound of jade bells and the breath of sweet perfumes filled the air. Thus he made his entry into the inner quarters. Many beautiful women were in waiting, all gorgeously apparelled, like the women of the gods. Among these he imagined that he would meet the master's daughter. In a little, accompanied by a host of others, she came, shining in jewels and beautiful clothing, so that she lighted up the palace. He took his stand before her, though her face was hidden from him by a fan of pearls. When he saw her at last, so beautiful was she that his eyes were dazzled. The other women, compared with her, were as the magpie to the phoenix. So bewildered was he that he dared not look up. The friend accompanying assisted him to bow and to go through the necessary forms. The ceremony was much the same as that observed among men. When it was over, the young man went back to his bridegroom's chamber. There the embroidered curtains, the golden screens, the silken clothing, the jeweled floor were such as no men of earth ever see. On the second day his mother-in-law called him to her. Her age would be about 30, and her face was like a freshly blown lotus flower. Here a great feast was spread, with many guests invited. The accompaniments thereof in the way of music were sweeter than mortals ever dreamed of. When the feast was over, the women caught up their skirts and, lifting their sleeves, danced together and sang in sweet accord. The sound of their singing caused even the clouds to stop and listen. When the day was over and all had well dined, the feast broke up. A young man, brought up in a country hut, had all of a sudden met the chief of the genii and had become a sharer in his glory and the accompaniments of his life. His mind was dazed and his thoughts overcome him. Doubts were mixed with fears. He knew not what to do. A sharer in the joys of the fairies he had certainly become, and a year or so passed in such delight as no words can ever describe. One day his wife said to him, "Would you like to enter into the inner enclosure and see as the fairies see?" He replied, "Gladly I would." Then she led him into a special park where there were lovely walks surrounded by green hills. As they advanced, there were charming views with springs of water and sparkling cascades. The scene grew gradually more entrancing, with jeweled flowers and scintillating spray, lovely birds and animals disporting themselves. A man once entering here would never again think of earth as a place to return to. After seeing this, he ascended the highest peak of all, which was like a tower of many stories. Before him lay a wide stretch of sea, with islands of the blessed standing out of the water, and long stretches of pleasant land in view. His wife showed them all to him, pointing out this and that. They seemed filled with golden palaces and surrounded with a halo of light. They were peopled with happy souls, some riding on cranes, some on the phoenix, some on the unicorn. Some were sitting on the clouds, some sailing by on the wind, some walking on the air, some gliding gently up the streams, some descending from above, some ascending, some moving west, some north, some gathering in groups. Flutes and harps sounded sweetly. So many and so startling were these things seen that he could never tell the tale of them. After the day had passed, they returned. Thus their joy unbroken, and when 2 years had gone by, she bore him 2 sons. Time moved on, when one day, unexpectedly, as he was seated with his wife, he began to cry, and tears soiled his face. She asked in amazement for the cause of it. "I was thinking," he said, "of how a plain countryman living in poverty had thus become the son-in-law of the king of the genii. But in my home is my poor old mother, whom I have not seen for these years. I would like to go see her, that my tears flow." The wife laughed and said, "Would you really like to see her? Then go, but do not cry." She told her father that her husband would like to go and see his mother. The master called him and gave his permission. The son thought, of course, that he would call many servants and send him in state, but not so. His wife gave him one little bundle, and that was all. So he said goodbye to his father-in-law, whose parting word was, "Go now and see your mother, and in a little I shall call for you again." He sent him with one servant, and so he passed out through the main gateway. There he saw a poor thin horse with a worn rag of a saddle on his back. He looked carefully and found that they were the dead horse and the dead servant, whom he had lost, restored to him. He gave a start and asked, "How did you come here?" The servant answered, "I was coming with you on the road when someone caught me away and brought me here. I do not know the reason, but I have been here for a long time." The man in great fear fastened on his bundle and started on his journey. The genie servant brought up in the rear, but after a short distance the world of wonder had become transformed into the old weary world again. Here it was with its fogs and thorn and precipice. He looked off toward the world of the genie, and it was but a dream. So overcome was he by his feelings that he broke down and cried. The genie servant said to him when he was weeping, "You have been for several years in an abode of the immortals, but you have not yet attained there too, for you have not yet forgotten the 7 things of earth: anger, sorrow, fear, ambition, hate, and selfishness. If you once get rid of these, there will be no tears for you." On hearing this, he stopped his crying, wiped his cheeks, and asked pardon. When he had gone a mile farther, he found himself on the main road. The servant said to him, "You know the way from this point on, so I shall go back." And thus at last the young man reached his home. He found there an exorcising ceremony in progress. Witches and spirit worshippers had been called and were saying their prayers. The family, seeing the young man come home thus, were all aghast. "It is his ghost," they said. However, they saw in a little that it was really he himself. The mother asked why he had not come home in all that time. She, being a very violent woman in disposition, he did not dare to tell her the truth, so he made up something else. The day of his return was the anniversary of his supposed death, and so they had called the witches for a prayer ceremony. Here he opened the bundle that his wife had given him and found 4 suits of clothes, one for each season. In about a year after his return home, the mother, seeing him alone, made application for the daughter of one of the village literati. The man, being timid by nature and afraid of offending his mother, did not dare to refuse, and was therefore married. But there was no joy in it, and the two never looked at each other. The young man had a friend whom he had known intimately from childhood. After his return, the friend came to see him frequently, and they used to spend the nights talking together. In their talks the friend inquired why all these years he had never come home. The young man then told him what had befallen him in the land of the genii, and how he had been there and had been married. The friend looked at him in wonder, for he seemed just as he had remembered him except in the matter of clothing. This he found on examination was of very strange material, neither grass, cloth, nor silk, nor cotton, but different from them all, and yet warm and comfortable. When spring came, the spring clothes sufficed. When summer came, those for summer, and for autumn and winter each special suit. They were never washed, and yet never became soiled. They never wore out, and always looked fresh and new. The friend was greatly astonished. Some 3 years passed, when one day there came once more a servant from the master of the genii, bringing his 2 sons. There were also letters, saying, "Next year the place where you dwell will be destroyed, and all the people will become fish and meat for the enemy. Therefore, follow this messenger and come, all of you." He told his friend this, and showed him his 2 sons. The friend, when he saw these children that looked like silk and jade, confessed the matter to the mother also. She, too, gladly agreed, and so they sold out and had a great feast for all the people of the town, and then bade farewell. This was the year 1635. They left and were never heard of again. The year following was the Manchu invasion, when the village where the young men had lived was all destroyed. To this day, young and old in Kai Pyong tell this story. Im Bang. End of chapter 24.
Yi Ryuk, translated by James S. Gale. The Honest Witch. Song Sang In matriculated in 1601. He was a just man and feared by the dishonest element of the court. In 1605 he graduated and became a provincial governor. He nearly lost his life in the disturbances of the reign of King Kwang Hai, and was exiled to Quelpart for a period of 10 years, but in the spring of 1623 he was recalled. The Story. There was a Korean once, called Song Sang In, whose mind was upright and whose spirit was true. He hated witches with all his might, and regarded them as deceivers of the people. "By their so-called prayers," said he, "they devour the people's goods. There is no limit to the foolishness and extravagance that accompanies them. This doctrine of theirs is all nonsense. Would that I could rid the earth of them and wipe out their names for ever." Some time later Song was appointed magistrate of Nam Won County in Chula Province. On his arrival he issued the following order: "If any witch is found in this county, let her be beaten to death." The whole place was so thoroughly spied upon that all the witches made their escape to other prefectures. The magistrate thought, "Now we are rid of them, and that ends the matter for this county at any rate." On a certain day he went out for a walk, and rested for a time at Kwang Han Pavilion. As he looked out from his coign of vantage, he saw a woman approaching on horseback, with a witch's drum on her head. He looked intently to make sure, and to his astonishment he saw that she was indeed a Mu Tang Which? He sent a yamen runner to have her arrested, and when she was brought before him, he asked, "Are you a mutang?" She replied, "Yes, I am." Then said he, "You did not know of the official order issued?" "Oh, yes, I heard of it," was her reply. He then asked, "Are you not afraid to die, that you stay here in this county?" The mutang bowed and made answer, "I have a matter of complaint to lay before your Excellency to be put right. Please take note of it and grant my request. It is this: there are true mutangs and false mutangs. False mutangs ought to be killed, but you would not kill an honest mutang, would you? Your orders pertain to false mutangs. I do not understand them as pertaining to those who are true. I am an honest mutang. I knew you would not kill me, so I remained here in peace." The magistrate asked, "How do you know that there are honest mutangs?" The woman replied, "Let's put the matter to the test and see. If I am not proven honest, let me die." "Very well," said the magistrate, "but can you really make good? And do you truly know how to call back departed spirits?" The mutang answered, "I can." The magistrate suddenly thought of an intimate friend who had been dead for some time, and he said to her, "I had a friend of such and such rank in soul. Can you call his spirit back to me?" The mutang replied, "Let me do so, but first you must prepare food with wine and serve it properly." The magistrate thought for a moment and then said to himself, "It is a serious matter to take a person's life. Let me find out first if she is true or not, and then decide." So he had the food brought. The mutang said also, "I want a suit of your clothes, too, please." This was brought, and she spread her mat in the courtyard, placed the food in order, donned the dress, and so made all preliminary arrangements. She then lifted her eyes toward heaven, and uttered the strange magic sounds by which spirits are called, meanwhile shaking a tinkling bell. In a little she turned and said, "I've come." Then she began telling the sad story of his sickness and death, and their separation. She reminded the magistrate of how they had played together, and of things that had happened when they were at school at their lessons, of the difficulties they had met in the examinations, of experiences that had come to them during their terms of office. She told secrets that they had confided to each other as intimate friends, and many matters most definitely that only they two knew. Not a single mistake did she make, but told the truth in every detail. The magistrate, when he heard these things, began to cry, saying, "The soul of my friend is really present. I can no longer doubt or deny it." Then he ordered the choicest fare possible to be prepared as a sacrifice to his friend. In a little the friend bade him farewell and took his departure. The magistrate said, "Alas! I thought mutangs were a brood of liars, but now I know that there are true mutangs as well as false." He gave her rich rewards, sent her away in safety, recalled his order against witches, and refrained from any matters pertaining to them for ever after. Im Bang. End of chapter 25. And Yi Ryuk, translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 26. Whom the King Honors. In the days of King Sejong, students of the Confucian College were having a picnic to celebrate the spring festival. They met in a wood to the north of the college, near a beautiful spring of water, and were drinking and feasting the night through. While they were thus enjoying themselves, the rooms of the college were left deserted. One student from the country, a backwoodsman in his way, who was of no account to others, thought that while the rest went away to enjoy themselves, someone ought to stay behind to guard the sacred precincts of the temple. So he decided that he would forego the pleasures of the picnic, stay behind and watch. The king at that time sent a eunuch to the college to see how many of the students had remained on guard. The eunuch returned, saying that all had gone off on the picnic except one man, a raw countryman, who was in sole charge. The king at once sent for the man, asking him to come just as he was in his common clothes. On his arrival, his Majesty asked, "When all have gone off for a gay time, why is it that you remain alone?" He replied, "I too would like to have gone, but to leave the sacred temple wholly deserted did not seem to me right, so I stayed." The king was greatly pleased with this reply, and asked again, "Do you know how to write verses?" The reply was, "I know only very little about it." The king then said, "I have one half of a verse here, which runs thus: After the rains, the mountains weep. You write me a mate for this line to go with it." At once the student replied, "Before the wind, the grass is tipsy." The king, delighted, praised him for his skill, and made him a special graduate on the spot, gave him his diploma, flowers for his hat, and issued a proclamation saying that he had passed the Al Song examination. At once he ordered for him the headgear, the red coat, a horse to ride on, 2 boys to go before, flute players and harpers, saying, "Go now to the picnic party and show yourself." While the picnickers were thus engaged, suddenly they heard the sound of flutes and harps, and they questioned as to what it could mean. This was not the time for new graduates to go abroad. While they looked, behold, here came a victorious candidate, dressed in ceremonial robes, heralded by boys, and riding on the king's palfrey, to greet them. On closer view they saw that it was the uncouth countryman, whom they had left behind at the temple. They asked what it meant, and then learned, to their amazement, that the king had so honored him. The company, in consternation and surprise, broke up and returned home at once. This special graduate became later, through the favor of the king, a great and noted man. Im Bang. End of chapter 26.
Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 27. The Fortunes of Yu. There was a man of Yongnam named Yu, who lived in the days of Sejong. He had studied the classics, had passed his examinations, and had become a petty official attached to the Confucian College. He was not even of the 6th degree, so that promotion was out of the question. He was a countryman who had no friends and no influence, and though he had long been in Seoul, there was no likelihood of any advancement. Such being the case, disheartened and lonely, he decided to leave the city and go back to his country home. There was a palace secretary who knew this countryman, and who went to say good-bye to him before he left. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the countryman said, "I have long been in Seoul, but have never yet seen the royal office of the secretaries. Might I accompany you some day when you take your turn?" The secretary said, "In the daytime there is always a crowd of people who gather there for business, and no one is allowed in without a special pass. I am going in tomorrow, however, and intend to sleep there, so that in the evening we could have a good chance to look the palace over. People are not allowed to sleep in the palace as a rule, but doing so once would not be specially noticed." The secretary then gave orders to the military guard who accompanied him to escort this man in the next day. As the secretary had arranged, the countryman, on the evening following, made his way into the palace enclosure. But what was his surprise to find that for some reason or other the secretary had not come. The gates also were closed behind him, so that he could not get out. Really, he was in a fix. There chanced to be a body servant of the secretary in the room, and he, feeling sorry for the stranger, arranged a hidden corner where he might pass the night, and then quietly take his departure in the morning. The night was beautifully clear, and apparently everyone slept but Yu. He was wide awake, and wondering to himself if he might not go quietly out and see the place. It was the time of the rainy season, and a portion of the wall had fallen from the enclosure just in front. So Yu climbed over this broken wall, and not knowing where he went, found himself suddenly in the royal quarters. It was a beautiful park, with trees and lakes and walks. "Whose house is this," thought Yu, "with its beautiful garden?" Suddenly a man appeared, with a nice new cap on his head, carrying a staff in his hand, and accompanied by a servant walking slowly towards him. It was no other than King Sejong, taking a stroll in the moonlight with one of his eunuchs. When they met, Yu had no idea that it was the king. His Majesty asked, "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" He told who he was, and how he had agreed to come in with the secretary, how the secretary had failed, how the gates were shut and he was a prisoner for the night, how he had seen the bright moonlight and wished to walk out, and finding the broken wall had come over. "Whose house is this anyway?" asked Yu. The king replied, "I am the master of this house." His Majesty then asked him in, and made him sit down on a mat beside him. So they talked and chatted together. The king learned that he had passed special examinations in the classics, and inquiring how it was that Yu had had no better office, Yu replied that he was an unknown countryman, that his family had no influence, and that while he desired office, he was forestalled by the powerful families of the capital. "Who is there," he asked, "that would bother himself about me? Thus all my hopes have failed, and I have just decided to leave the city and go back home and live out my days there." The king asked again, "You know the classics so well. Do you know something of the Book of Changes?" He replied, "The deeper parts I do not know, but the easier parts only." Then the king ordered a eunuch to bring the Book of Changes. It was the time when his Majesty was reading it for himself. The book was brought and opened in the moonlight. The king looked up a part that had given him special difficulty, and this the stranger explained, character by character, giving the meaning with convincing clearness. The king was delighted and wondered greatly, and so they read together all through the night. When they separated, the king said, "You have all this knowledge, and yet have never been made use of? Alas for my country!" he said, sighing. Yu remarked that he would like to go straight home now, if the master would kindly open the door for him. The king said, however, that it was too early yet, and that he might be arrested by the guards who were about. "Go then," he said, "to where you were, and when it is broad daylight you can go through the open gate." Yu then bade good-bye, and went back over the broken wall to his corner of the secretary's room. When morning came he went out through the main gateway and returned to his home. On the following day the king sent a special secretary and had Yu appointed to the office of Overseer of Literature. On the promulgation of this, the officials gathered in the public court and protested in high dudgeon against so great an office being given to an unknown person. His Majesty, however, said, "If you are opposed to it, I'll desist." But the day following he appointed him to an office 1 degree still higher. Again they all protested, and his Majesty said, "Really, if you so object, I'll drop the matter." The day following he appointed him to an office still 1 degree higher. Again they all protested, and he apparently yielded to them. But the day following, higher still he was promoted. And again the protests poured in, so much so that his Majesty seemed to yield. On the day following this, the king wrote out for him the office of Vice President of all the literati. The high officials gathered again and inquired of one another as to what the king meant, and what they had better do about it. "If we do not in some way prevent it, he will appoint him president of the literati." They decided to drop the matter for the present, and see later what was best to do. A royal banquet was announced to take place when all the officials gathered. On this occasion the high ministers of state said quietly to the king, "It is not fitting that so obscure a person have so important an office. Your Majesty's promoting him as you have done has thrown the whole official body into a state of consternation. On our protest you have merely promoted him more. What is your Majesty's reason, please, for this action?" The king made no reply, but ordered a eunuch to bring the Book of Changes. He opened it at the place of special difficulty, and inquired as to its meaning. Even among the highest ministers not one could give an answer. He inquired by name of this one and that, but all were silent. The king then said, "I am greatly interested in the Book of Changes. It is the great book of the sages. Any one who understands it surely ought to be promoted. You, all of you, fail to grasp its meaning, while you, whom you protest against, has explained it all to me. Now what have you to say? You's being promoted thus is just as it ought to be. Why do you object? I shall promote him still more and more, so cease from all opposition." They were afraid and ashamed, and did not again mention it. Yu, from that time on, became the royal teacher of the Chu Yuk, the Book of Changes, and rose higher and higher in rank, till he became head of the Confucian College and first in influence, surpassing all. Note: many people of ability have no chance for promotion. It is difficult to have one's gifts known in high places, how much more difficult before a king. The good fortune that fell to the first scholar was of God's appointment. By caring for a vacant house the honor came to him, and he was promoted. The others going thus unbidden into the palace was a great wrong, but by royal favor he was pardoned, received, and honored. By one line of poetry a man's ability was made manifest, and by one explanation of the Chu Yuk another's path was opened to high promotion. If Sejong had not been a great and enlightened king, how could it have happened? Very rare are such happenings indeed. So all men wondered over what had befallen these two. I, however, wondered more over the king's sagacity in finding them. To my day his virtue and accomplishments are known, so that the world calls him Korea's king of the golden age. Im Bang. End of chapter 27.
Rook, translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 28, An Encounter with a Hobgoblin. I got myself into trouble in the year Pyong Sin, and was locked up. A military man by the name of Choi Wan So, who was captain of the guard, was involved in it, and locked up as well. We often met in prison, and whiled away the hours talking together. On a certain day the talk turned on goblins, when Captain Choi said, "When I was young I met with a hobgoblin, which, by the fraction of a hair, almost cost me my life. A strange case indeed." I asked him to tell me of it, when he replied, "I had originally no home in Seoul, but hearing of a vacant place in Belt Town, I made application and got it. We went there, my father and the rest of the family occupying the inner quarters, while I lived in the front room. One night, late, when I was half asleep, the door suddenly opened, and a woman came in and stood just before the lamp. I saw her clearly, and knew that she was from the home of a scholar friend, for I had seen her before, and had been greatly attracted by her beauty, but had never had a chance to meet her. Now, seeing her enter the room thus, I greeted her gladly, but she made no reply. I rose to take her by the hand, when she began walking backwards, so that my hand never reached her. I rushed towards her, but she hastened her backward pace, so that she eluded me. We reached the gate, which she opened with a rear kick, and I followed on after, till she suddenly disappeared. I searched on all sides, but not a trace was there of her. I thought she had merely hidden herself, and never dreamed of anything else. On the next night she came again, and stood before the lamp, just as she had done the night previous. I got up and again tried to take hold of her, but again she began her peculiar pace backwards, till she passed out at the gate, and disappeared just as she had done the day before. I was once more surprised and disappointed, but did not think of her as being a hobgoblin. A few days later at night I had lain down, when suddenly there was a sound of crackling paper overhead from above the ceiling. A forbidding, creepy sound it seemed in the midnight. A moment later a curtain was let down that divided the room into two parts. Again, later, a large fire of coals descended right in front of me, while an immense heat filled the place. Where I was seemed all on fire, with no way of escape possible. In terror for my life, I knew not what to do. On the first cock crow of morning the noise ceased, the curtain went up, and the fire of coals was gone. The place was as though swept with a broom, so clean from every trace of what had happened. The following night I was again alone, but had not yet undressed or lain down, when a great stout man suddenly opened the door and came in. He had on his head a soldier's felt hat, and on his body a blue tunic, like one of the underlings of the yamen. He took hold of me and tried to drag me out. I was then young and vigorous, and had no intention of yielding to him, so we entered on a tussle. The moon was bright and the night clear, but I, unable to hold my own, was pulled out into the court. He lifted me up and swung me round and round, then went up to the highest terrace and threw me down, so that I was terribly stunned. He stood in front of me and kept me a prisoner. There was a garden to the rear of the house and a wall round it. I looked, and within the wall were a dozen or so of people. They were all dressed in military hats and coats, and they kept shouting out, "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" The man that mishandled me, however, said in reply, "It's none of your business, none of your business." But they still kept up the cry, "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" And he, on the other hand, cried, "Never you mind, none of your business." They shouted, "The man is a gentleman of the military class. Do not hurt him." The fellow merely said in reply, "Even though he is, it's none of your business." So he took me by the two hands and flung me up into the air, till I went half way and more to heaven. Then in my fall I went shooting past Kiang Kiu province, past Chung Chong, and at last fell to the ground in Chula. In my flight through space I saw all the county towns of the 3 provinces as clear as day. Again in Chula he tossed me up once more. Again I went shooting up into the sky, and falling northward, till I found myself at home, lying stupefied below the veranda terrace. Once more I could hear the voices of the group in the garden shouting, "Don't hurt him! Hurt him!" But the man said, "None of your business, your business." He took me up once more and flung me up again, and away I went speeding off to Chula, and back I came again, 2 or 3 times in all. Then one of the group in the garden came forward, took my tormentor by the hand, and led him away. They all met for a little to talk and laugh over the matter, and then scattered and were gone, so that they were not seen again. I lay motionless at the foot of the terrace till the following morning, when my father found me and had me taken in hand and cared for, so that I came to, and we all left the haunted house, never to go back. Note: there are various reasons by which a place may be denominated a haunted house. The fact that there are hobgoblins in it makes it haunted. If a good or superior man enters such a place, the goblins move away, and no word of being haunted will be heard. Choi saw the goblin and was greatly injured. I understand that it is not only a question of men fearing the goblins, but they also fear men. The fact that there are so few people that they fear is the saddest case of all. Choi was afraid of the goblins. That is why they troubled him. M. Bang. End of chapter 28.
Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 29. The Snake's Revenge. There lived in ancient days an archer, whose home was near the Water Gate of Seoul. He was a man of great strength and famous for his valor. Water Gate has reference to a hole under the city wall, by which the waters of the Grand Canal find their exit. In it are iron pickets to prevent people's entering or departing by that way. On a certain afternoon, when this military officer was taking a walk, a great snake was seen making its way by means of the Water Gate. The snake's head had already passed between the bars, but its body, being larger, could not get through, so there it was held fast. The soldier drew an arrow, and fitting it into the string, shot the snake in the head. Its head being fatally injured, the creature died. The archer then drew it out, pounded it into a pulp, and left it. A little time later, the man's wife conceived and bore a son. From the first the child was afraid of its father, and when it saw him it used to cry and seemed greatly frightened. As it grew, it hated the sight of its father more and more. The man became suspicious of this, and so, instead of loving his son, he grew to dislike him. On a certain day, when there were just the two of them in the room, the officer lay down to have a midday siesta, covering his face with his sleeve, but all the while keeping his eye on the boy to see what he would do. The child glared at his father, and thinking him asleep, got a knife and made a thrust at him. The man jumped, grabbed the knife, and then with a club gave the boy a blow that left him dead on the spot. He pounded him into a pulp, left him, and went away. The mother, however, in tears, covered the little form with a quilt and prepared for its burial. In a little the quilt began to move, and she, in alarm, raised it to see what had happened, when lo! beneath it the child was gone, and there lay coiled a huge snake instead. The mother jumped back in fear, left the room, and did not enter it again. When evening came, the husband returned and heard the dreadful story from his wife. He went in and looked, and now all had metamorphosed into a huge snake. On the head of it was the scar mark of the arrow that he had shot. He said to the snake, "You and I were originally not enemies. I therefore did wrong in shooting you as I did. But your intention to take revenge through becoming my son was a horrible deed. Such a thing as this is proof that my suspicions of you were right and just. You became my son in order to kill me, your father. Why, therefore, should I not in my turn kill you? If you attempt it again, it will certainly end in my taking your life. You have already had your revenge, and have once more transmigrated into your original shape. Let us drop the past and be friends from now on. What do you say?" He repeated this over and urged his proposals, while the snake with bowed head seemed to listen intently. He then opened the door and said, "Now you may go as you please." The snake then departed, making straight for the water gate, and passed out between the bars. It did not again appear. Note: Man is a spiritual being, and different from all other created things. And though a snake has power of venom, it is still an insignificant thing compared with a man. The snake died, and by means of the transmigration of its soul, took its revenge. Man dies, but I have never heard that he can transmigrate as the snake did. Why is it that though a spiritual being he is unable to do what beasts do? I have seen many innocent men killed, but not one of them has ever returned to take his revenge on the lawless one who did it. And so I wonder more than ever over these stories of the snake. The superior man's knowing nothing of the law that governs these things is a regret to me. Im Bang. End of chapter 29. Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 30. The Brave Magistrate. In olden times, in one of the counties of North Ham Kyong Province, there was an evil-smelling goblin that caused great destruction to life. Successive magistrates appeared, but in 10 days or so after arrival, in each case they died in great agony, so that no man wished to have the billet or anything to do with the place. 100 or more were asked to take the post, but they all refused. At last one brave soldier, who was without any influence socially or politically, accepted. He was a courageous man, strong and fearless. He thought, "Even though there is a devil there, all men will not die surely. I shall make a trial of him." So he said his farewell and entered on his office. He found himself alone in the yamen, as all others had taken flight. He constantly carried a long knife at his belt, and went thus armed, for he noticed from the first day a fishy, stinking odor that grew gradually more and more marked. After 5 or 6 days he took note, too, that what looked like a mist would frequently make its entry by the outer gate, and from this mist came this stinking smell. Daily it grew more and more annoying, so that he could not stand it longer. In 10 days or so, when the time arrived for him to die, the yamen runners and servants who had returned again ran away. The magistrate kept a jar of whiskey by his side, from which he drank frequently, to fortify his soul. On this day he grew very drunk, and thus waited. At last he saw something coming through the main gateway that seemed wrapped in fog, 3 or 4 embraces in waist size, and 15 feet or so high. There was no head to it, nor were body or arms visible. Only on the top were 2 dreadful eyes rolling wildly. The magistrate jumped up at once, rushed toward it, gave a great shout, and struck it with his sword. When he gave it the blow there was the sound of thunder, and the whole thing dissipated. Also the foul smell that accompanied it disappeared at once. The magistrate then, in a fit of intoxication, fell prone. The retainers, all thinking him dead, gathered in the courtyard to prepare for his burial. They saw him fall into the earth, but they remarked that the bodies of others who had died from this evil had all been left on the veranda, but his was in the lower court. They raised him up in order to prepare him for burial, when suddenly he came to life, looked at them in anger, and asked what they meant. Fear and amazement possessed them. From that time on there was no more smell. Im Bang. End of chapter 30.
And Yi Ryuk. Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 31. The Temple to the God of War. Yi Hang Bok. When he was a child, a blind fortune teller came and cast his future, saying, "This boy will be very great indeed." At 7 years of age his father gave him for subject to write a verse on "The Harp and the Sword," and he wrote, "The sword pertains to the hand of the warrior, and the harp to the music of the ancients." At 8 he took the subject of "The Willow before the Door," and wrote, "The east wind brushes the brow of the cliff, and the willow on the edge nods fresh and green." On seeing a picture of a great banquet among the fierce Turks of Central Asia, he wrote thus, "The hunt is off in the wild dark hills, and the moon is cold and grey, while the tramping feet of 1,000 horse ring on the frosty way. In the tents of the Turk the music thrills, and the wine cups chink for joy, mid the noise of the dancers' savage tread, and the lilt of the wild hautboy." At 12 years of age he was proud, we are told, and haughty. He dressed well, and was envied by the poorer lads of the place, and once he took off his coat and gave it to a boy who looked with envy on him. He gave his shoes as well, and came back barefoot. His mother, wishing to know his mind in the matter, pretended to reprimand him, but he replied, saying, "Mother, when others wanted it so, how could I refuse giving?" His mother pondered these things in her heart. When he was 15 he was strong and well built, and liked vigorous exercise, so that he was a noted wrestler and skilful at shuttlecock. His mother, however, frowned upon these things, saying that they were not dignified, so that he gave them up and confined his attention to literary studies, graduating at 25 years of age. In 1592, during the Japanese War, when the king escaped to Iuju, Yi Hang Bok went with him in his flight, and there he met the Chinese Ming representative, who said in surprise to his majesty, "Do you mean to tell me that you have men in Chosen like Yi Hang Bok?" Yang Ho, the general of the rescuing forces, also continually referred to him for advice and counsel. He lived to see the troubles in the reign of the wicked Kwang Hai, and at last went into exile in Pok Chung. When he crossed the iron pass near Wonsan, he wrote, "From the giddy height of the iron peak I call upon the passing cloud, to take up a lonely exile's tears in the folds of its feathery shroud, and drop them as rain on the palace gates, on the king and his shameless crowd." The Story. During the Japanese War, in the reign of Sonjo, the Mings sent a great army that came east, drove out the enemy, and restored peace. At that time the general of the Mings informed his Korean Majesty that the victory was due to the help of Kwan, the god of war. "This being the case," said he, "you ought not to continue without temples in which to express your gratitude to him." So they built him houses of worship and offered him sacrifice. The temples built were one to the south and one to the east of the city. In examining sites for these they could not agree on the one to the south. Some wanted it nearer the wall, and some farther away. At that time an official, called Yi Hang Bok, was in charge of the conference. On a certain day when Yi was at home a military officer called and wished to see him. Ordering him in, he found him a great strapping fellow, splendidly built. His request was that Yi should send out all his retainers till he talked to him privately. They were sent out, and then the stranger gave his message. After he had finished, he said good-bye, and left. Yi had at that time an old friend stopping with him. The friend went out with the servants when they were asked to leave, and now he came back again. When he came in he noticed that the face of the master had a very peculiar expression, and he asked him the reason of it. Yi made no reply at first, but later told his friend that a very extraordinary thing had happened. The military man who had come and called was none other than a messenger of the god of war. His coming, too, was on account of their not yet having decided in regard to the site for the temple. "He came," said Yi, "to show me where it ought to be. He urged that it was not a matter for time only, but for the eternities to come. If we do not get it right the god of war will find no peace. I told him in reply that I would do my best. Was this not strange?" The friend who heard this was greatly exercised, but Yi warned him not to repeat it to anyone. Yi used all his efforts, and at last the building was placed on the approved site, where it now stands. Im Bang. End of chapter 31.
Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 32. A Visit from the Shades. Choi Yu Wan. The story of meeting his mother's ghost is reported to be of this man. Choi Yu Wan matriculated in 1579 and graduated in 1602, becoming Chief Justice and having conferred on him the rank of Prince. When he was a boy, his great aunt once gave him cloth for a suit of clothes, but he refused to accept of it, and from this his aunt prophesied that he would yet become a famous man. He studied in the home of the great teacher Yul Gok, and Yul Gok also foretold that the day would come when he would be an honor to Korea. Yu Wan once met Chang Han Kang and inquired of him concerning Pian Wa Kiu Jil, a law by which the weak become strong, the wicked good, and the stupid wise. He also asked that if one be truly transformed, will the soul change as well as the body, or the body only? Chang replied, "Both are changed, for how could the body change without the soul?" Yu Wan asked Yul Gok concerning this also, and Yul Gok replied that Chang's words were true. In 1607, Choi Yu Wan memorialized the king, calling attention to a letter received from Japan in answer to a communication sent by His Majesty, which had on its address the name of the Prime Minister, written a space lower than good form required. The Korean envoy had not protested, as duty would require of him, and yet the king had advanced him in rank. The various officials commended him for his courage. In 1612, when he was Chief Justice, King Kwang Hai tried to degrade the Queen Dowager, who was not his own mother, he being born of a concubine. But Yu Wan besought him with tears not to do so illegal and unnatural a thing. Still the king overrode all opposition, and did according to his unfilial will. In it all, Choi Yu Wan was proved a good man, and a just. He used to say to his companions, even as a youth, "Death is dreadful, but still better death for righteousness' sake and honor than life in disgrace. Another saying of his runs, all one's study is for the development of character. If it ends not in that, it is in vain. Korea's ancient belief was that the blood of a faithful son served as an elixir of life to the dying, so that when his mother was at the point of death, Yu Wan with a knife cut flesh from his thigh till the blood flowed, and with this he prepared his magic dose. The story. There was a minister in olden days who once, when he was palace secretary, was getting ready for office in the morning. He had on his ceremonial dress. It was rather early, and as he leaned on his armrest for a moment, sleep overcame him. He dreamt, and in the dream he thought he was mounted and on his journey. He was crossing the bridge at the entrance to East Palace Street, when suddenly he saw his mother coming towards him on foot. He at once dismounted, bowed, and said, "Why do you come thus, mother, not in a chair, but on foot?" She replied, "I have already left the world, and things are not where I am as they are where you are, and so I walk." The secretary asked, "Where are you going, please?" She replied, "We have a servant living at Yongsan, and they are having a witches' prayer service there just now, so I am going to partake of the sacrifice." "But," said the secretary, "we have sacrificial days, many of them, at our own home, those of the 4 seasons, also on the 1st and 15th of each month. Why do you go to a servant's house, and not to mine?" The mother replied, "Your sacrifices are of no interest to me. I like the prayers of the witches. If there is no medium, we spirits find no satisfaction. I am in a hurry," said she, "and cannot wait longer." So she spoke her farewell, and was gone. The secretary awoke with a start, but felt that he had actually seen what had come to pass. He then called a servant and told him to go at once to so-and-so's house in Yongsan and tell a certain servant to come that night without fail. "Go quickly," said the secretary, "so that you can be back before I enter the palace." Then he sat down to meditate over it. In a little the servant had gone and come again. It was not yet broad daylight, and because it was cold the servant did not enter straight, but went first into the kitchen to warm his hands before the fire. There was a fellow servant there, who asked him, "Have you had something to drink?" He replied, "They are having a big witch business on at Yongsan, and while the Mutang witch was performing, she said that the spirit that possessed her was the mother of the master here. On my appearance, she called out my name and said, 'This is a servant from our house.' Then she called me and gave me a big glass of spirit. She added further, 'On my way here, I met my son going into the palace.'" The secretary, overhearing this talk from the room where he was waiting, broke down and began to cry. He called in the servant and made fuller inquiry, and more than ever he felt assured that his mother's spirit had really gone that morning to share in the Kut, which is sacrificial ceremony. He then called the Mutang, and in behalf of the spirit of his mother made her a great offering. Ever afterwards he sacrificed to her 4 times a year at each returning season. Im Bang. End of chapter 32.
And Yi Ryuk. Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 33. The Fearless Captain. There was formerly a soldier, Yi Manji of Yongnam, a strong and muscular fellow, and brave as a lion. He had green eyes and a terrible countenance. Frequently he said, "Fear? What is fear?" On a certain day when he was in his house a sudden storm of rain came on, when there were flashes of lightning and heavy claps of thunder. At one of them a great ball of fire came tumbling into his home and went rolling over the veranda, through the rooms, into the kitchen, and out into the yard, and again into the servants' quarters. Several times it went and came bouncing about. Its blazing light and the accompanying noise made it a thing of terror. Yi sat in the outer veranda, wholly undisturbed. He thought to himself, "I have done no wrong, therefore why need I fear the lightning?" A moment later a flash struck the large elm tree in front of the house and smashed it to pieces. The rain then ceased, and the thunder likewise. Yi turned to see how it fared with his family, and found them all fallen senseless. With the greatest of difficulty he had them restored to life. During that year they all fell ill and died, and Yi came to Seoul and became a captain of the Right Guard. Shortly after he went to North Hamgyong Province. There he took a second wife and settled down. All his predecessors had died of goblin influences, and the fact that calamity had overtaken them while in the official quarters had caused them to use one of the village houses instead. Yi, however, determined to live down all fear and go back to the old quarters, which he extensively repaired. One night his wife was in the inner room, while he was alone in the public office with a light burning before him. In the second watch or thereabout, a strange-looking object came out of the inner quarters. It looked like the stump of a tree wrapped in black sackcloth. There was no outline or definite shape to it, and it came jumping along and sat itself immediately before Yi Manji. Also 2 other objects came following in its wake, shaped just like the first one. The 3 then sat in a row before Yi, coming little by little closer and closer to him. Yi moved away till he had backed up against the wall and could go no farther. Then he said, "Who are you, anyhow? What kind of devil, pray, that you dare to push towards me so in my office? If you have any complaint or matter to set right, say so, and I'll see to it." The middle devil said in reply, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry." Yi answered, "Hungry, are you? Very well, now just move back and I'll have food prepared for you in abundance." He then repeated a magic formula that he had learned, and snapped his fingers. The 3 devils seemed to be afraid of this. Then Manji suddenly closed his fist and struck a blow at the first devil. It dodged, however, most deftly, and he missed, but hit the floor with a sounding blow that cut his hand. Then they all shouted, we'll go, since you treat guests thus." At once they bundled out of the room and disappeared. On the following day he had oxen killed and a sacrifice offered to these devils, and they returned no more. Note: Men have been killed by goblins. It is not so much due to the fact that goblins are wicked as to the fact that men are afraid of them. Many died in North Hamgyong, but those again who were brave, and clove them with a knife, or struck them down, lived. If they had been afraid, they too would have died. Imbang. End of chapter 33.
Korean Folk Tales by Im Bang and Yi Ryuk. Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 34. The King of Yom-Na, Hell. Pak Chom was one of the royal censors and died in the Japanese War of 1592. The story. In Yunnan County, Wanghai Province, there was a certain literacy graduate whose name I have forgotten. He fell ill one day and remained in his room, leaning helplessly against his armrest. Suddenly several spirit soldiers appeared to him, saying, "The governor of the lower hell has ordered your arrest." So they bound him with a chain about his neck and led him away. They journeyed for many hundreds of miles, and at last reached a place that had a very high wall. The spirits then took him within the walls and went on for a long distance. There was within this enclosure a great structure, whose height reached to heaven. They arrived at the gate, and the spirits who had him in hand led him in, and when they entered the inner courtyard, they laid him down on his face. Glancing up, he saw what looked like a king seated on a throne. Grouped about him on each side were attendant officers. There were also scores of secretaries and soldiers going and coming on pressing errands. The king's appearance was most terrible, and his commands such as to fill one with awe. The graduate felt the perspiration break out on his back, and he dared not look up. In a little, a secretary came forward, stood in front of the raised dais to transmit commands, and the king asked, "Where do you come from? What is your name? How old are you? What do you do for a living? Tell me the truth now, and no dissembling." The scholar, frightened to death, replied, "My clan name is so-and-so, and my given name is so-and-so. I am so old, and I have lived for several generations at Yonnam, Wanghai province. I am stupid and ill-equipped by nature, so I have not done anything special. I have heard all my life that if you say your beads with love and pity in your heart, you will escape hell, and so have given my time to calling on the Buddha and dispensing alms." The secretary, hearing this, went at once and reported it to the king. After some time he came back with a message saying, "Come up closer to the steps, for you are not the person intended. It happens that you bear the same name, and you have thus been wrongly arrested. You may go now." The scholar joined his hands and made a deep bow. Again the secretary transmitted a message from the king, saying, "My house, when on earth, was in such a place, in such and such a ward of Seoul. When you go back, I want to send a message by you. My coming here is long, and the outer coat I wear is worn to shreds. Ask my people to send me a new outer coat. If you do so, I shall be greatly obliged, so see that you do not forget." The scholar said, "Your Majesty's message given me thus direct I shall pass on without fail, but the ways of the two worlds, the dark world and the light, are so different that when I give the message the hearers will say I am talking nonsense. True, I'll give it just as you have commanded, but what about it if they refuse to listen? I ought to have some evidence as proof to help me out." The king made answer, "Your words are true, very true. This will help you. When I was on earth," said he, "one of my head buttons that I wore had a broken edge, and I hid it in the 3rd volume of the Book of History. I alone know of it, no one else in the world. If you give this as a proof, they will listen." The scholar replied, "That will be satisfactory, but again how shall I do in case they make the new coat?" The reply was, "Prepare a sacrifice, offer the coat by fire, and it will reach me." They then bade good-bye, and the king sent with him 2 soldier guards. He asked the soldiers as they came out who the one seated on the throne was. "He is the king of Hades," said they. "His surname is Pak, and his given name is O." They arrived at the bank of a river, and the 2 soldiers pushed him into the water. He awoke with a start, and found that he had been dead for 3 days. When he recovered from his sickness, he came up to Seoul, searched out the house indicated, and made careful inquiry as to the name, finding that it was no other than Pak O. Pak O had 2 sons, who at that time had graduated and were holding office. The graduate wanted to see the sons of this king of Hades, but the gatekeeper would not let him in. Therefore he stood before the red gate, waiting helplessly till the sun went down. Then came out from the inner quarters of the house an old servant, to whom he earnestly made petition that he might see the master. On being thus requested, the servant returned and reported it to the master, who, a little later, ordered him in. On entering, he saw 2 gentlemen who seemed to be chiefs. They had him sit down, and then questioned him as to who he was and what he had to say. He replied, "I am a student living in Yonnan County, Wanghai province. On such and such a day I died and went to the other world, where your honorable father gave me such and such commission." The 2 listened for a little, and then, without waiting to hear all that he had to say, grew very angry and began to scold him, saying, "How dare such a scarecrow as you come into our house and say such things as these? This is stuff and nonsense that you talk. Pitch him out," they shouted to the servants. He, however, called back, saying, I have a proof, listen. If it fails, why then, pitch me out. One of the two said, What possible proof can you have? Then the scholar told with great exactness and care the story of the head button. The two, in astonishment over this, had the book taken down and examined, and sure enough in volume 3 of the Book of History was the button referred to. Not a single particular had failed. It proved to be a button that they had missed after the death of their father, and that they had searched for in vain. Accepting the message now as true, they all entered upon a period of mourning. The women of the family also called in the scholar and asked him specially of what he had seen. So they made the outer coat, chose a day, and offered it by fire before the ancestral altar. 3 days after the sacrifice the scholar dreamed, and the family of Pak dreamed too, that the king of Hades had come and given to each one of them his thanks for the coat. They long kept the scholar at their home, treating him with great respect, and became his firm friends forever after. Pak O was a great-grandson of Minister Pak Chom. While he held office he was honest and just, and was highly honored by the people. When he was mayor of Haiju, there arose a dispute between him and the governor, which proved also that Pak was the honest man. When I was at Haiju, Choi Yu Chom, a graduate, told me this story. Imbang. End of chapter 34. Korean Folk Tales by Imbang and Yi Ryuk. Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 35. Hong's Experiences in Hades. Hong Nai Pom was a military graduate who was born in the year A.D. 1561 and lived in the city of Pyongyang. He passed his examination in the year 1603, and in the year 1637 attained to the 3rd degree. He was 82 in the year 1643, and his son Son memorialized the king, asking that his father be given rank appropriate to his age. At that time a certain Han Hong Kil was chief of the royal secretaries, and he refused to pass on the request to his majesty. But in the year 1644, when the crown prince was returning from his exile in China, he came by way of Pyongyang. Son took advantage of this to present the same request to the crown prince. His Highness received it and had it brought to the notice of the king. In consequence, Hong received the rank of 2nd degree. On receiving it, he said, "This year I shall die," and a little later he died. In the year 1594, Hong fell ill of typhus fever, and after 10 days of suffering, died. They prepared his body for burial and placed it in a coffin. Then the friends and relatives left, and his wife remained alone in charge. Of a sudden the body turned itself and fell with a thud to the ground. The woman, frightened, fainted away, and the other members of the family came rushing to her help. From this time on the body resumed its functions, and Hong lived. Said he, "In my dream I went to a certain region, a place of great fear, where many persons were standing around, and awful ogres, some of them wearing bulls' heads, and some with faces of wild beasts. They crowded about and jumped and pounced toward me in all directions. A scribe robed in black sat on a platform and addressed me, saying, 'There are 3 religions on earth, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. According to Buddhism, you know that heaven and hell are places that decide between a man's good and evil deeds. You have ever been a blasphemer of the Buddha and a denier of a future life, acting always as though you knew everything, blustering and storming. You are now to be sent to hell, and 10,000 kalpas will not see you out of it.' Then 2 or 3 constables carrying spears came and took me off. I screamed, 'You are wrong, I am innocently condemned.' Just at that moment a certain Buddha with a face of shining gold came smiling toward me and said, "There is truly a mistake somewhere. This man must attain to the age of 83 and become an officer of the 2nd degree ere he dies." Then, addressing me, he asked, "How is it that you have come here? The order was that a certain Hong of Chonju be arrested and brought, not you. But now that you have come, look about the place before you go, and tell the world afterwards of what you have seen." The guards, on hearing this, took me in hand and brought me first to a prison house, where a sign was posted up, marked, "Stirrers up of strife." I saw in this prison a great brazier-shaped pit, built of stones and filled with fire. Flames arose and forked tongues. The stirrers up of strife were taken and made to sit close before it. I then saw one infernal guard take a long rod of iron, heated red hot, and put out the eyes of the guilty ones. I saw also that the offenders were hung up like dried fish. The guides who accompanied me said, "While these were on earth they did not love their brethren, but looked at others as enemies. They scoffed at the laws of God and sought only selfish gain, so they are punished." The next hell was marked "Liars." In that hell I saw an iron pillar of several yards in height, and great stones placed before it. The offenders were called up and made to kneel before the pillar. Then I saw an executioner take a knife and drive a hole through the tongues of the offenders, pass an iron chain through each, and hang them on the pillar so that they dangled by their tongues several feet from the ground. A stone was then taken and tied to each culprit's feet. The stones thus bearing down and the chains being fast to the pillar, their tongues were pulled out a foot or more, and their eyes rolled in their sockets. Their agonies were appalling. The guides again said, "These offenders when on earth used their tongues skillfully to tell lies and to separate friend from friend, and so they are punished." The next hell had inscribed on it, "Deceivers." I saw in it many scores of people. There were ogres that cut the flesh from their bones and fed it to starving demons. These ate, and the flesh was cut and cut till only the bones remained. When the winds of hell blew, flesh returned to them. Then metal snakes and copper dogs crowded in to bite them and suck their blood. Their screams of pain made the earth to tremble. The guides said to me, "When these offenders were on earth they held high office, and while they pretended to be true and good, they received bribes in secret and were doers of all evil. As ministers of state they ate the fat of the land and sucked the blood of the people, and yet advertised themselves as benefactors and were highly applauded. While in reality they lived as thieves, they pretended to be holy, as Confucius and Mencius are holy. They were deceivers of the world, and robbers, and so are punished thus." The guides then said, "It is not necessary that you see all the hells." They said to one another, "Let's take him yonder and show him." So they went some distance to the southeast. There was a great house with a sign painted thus, "The Home of the Blessed." As I looked, there were beautiful halos encircling it, and clouds of glory. There were hundreds of priests in cassock and surplice. Some carried fresh-blown lotus flowers, some were seated like the Buddha, some were reading prayers. The guides said, "These when on earth kept the faith, and with undivided hearts served the Buddha, and so have escaped the 8 sorrows and the 10 punishments, and are now in the home of the happy, which is called heaven." When we had seen all these things, we returned. The golden-faced Buddha said to me, "Not many on earth believe in the Buddha, and few know of heaven and hell. What do you think of it?" I bowed low and thanked him. Then the black-coated scribe said, "I am sending this man away, see him safely off." The spirit soldiers took me with them, and while on the way I awakened with a start, and found that I had been dead for 4 days. Hong's mind was filled with pride on this account, and he frequently boasted of it. His age and second degree of rank came about just as the Buddha had predicted. His experience, alas, was used as a means to deceive people, for the superior man does not talk of these strange and wonderful things. Yi Tan, a Chinaman of the Song kingdom, used to say, "If there is no heaven, there is no heaven, but if there is one, the superior man alone can attain to it. If there is no hell, there is no hell, but if there is one, the bad man must inherit it." If we examine Hong's story, while it looks like a yarn to deceive the world, it really is a story to arouse one to right action. I, Im Bang, have recorded it like Toi Chi, saying, "Don't find fault with the story, but learn its lesson." Im Bang. End of chapter 35.
Translated by James S. Gale. Chapter 36. Haunted Houses. There once lived a man in Seoul called Yi Chang, who frequently told as an experience of his own the following story. He was poor and had no home of his own, so he lived much in quarters loaned him by others. When hard pressed, he even went into haunted houses and lived there. Once, after failing to find a place, he heard of one such house in Ink Town, one of the wards of Seoul, at the foot of South Mountain, which had been haunted for generations and was now left vacant. Chang investigated the matter and finally decided to take possession. First, to find whether it was really haunted or not, he called his elder brothers, Hugh and Haw, and 5 or 6 of his relatives, and had them help clean it out and sleep there. The house had one upper room that was fast locked. Looking through a chink, there was seen to be in the room a tablet chair and a stand for it. Also there was an old harp without any strings, a pair of worn shoes, and some sticks and bits of wood. Nothing else was in the room. Dust lay thick, as though it had gathered through long years of time. The company, after drinking wine, sat round the table and played at games, watching the night through. When it was late, towards midnight, they suddenly heard the sound of harps and a great multitude of voices, though the words were mixed and unintelligible. It was as though many people were gathered and carousing at a feast. The company then consulted as to what they should do. One drew a sword and struck a hole through the partition that looked into the tower. Instantly there appeared from the other side a sharp blade thrust out towards them. It was blue in colour. In fear and consternation they desisted from further interference with the place, but the sound of the harp and the revelry kept up till the morning. The company broke up at daylight, withdrew from the place, and never again dared to enter. In the South Ward there was another haunted house of which Chang desired possession, so he called his friends and brothers once more, to make the experiment, and see whether it was really haunted or not. On entering they found 2 dogs within the enclosure, one black and one tan, lying upon the open verandah, one at each end. Their eyes were fiery red, and though the company shouted at them, they did not move. They neither barked nor bit. But when midnight came, these 2 animals got up and went down into the court, and began baying at the inky sky in a way most ominous. They went jumping back and forth. At the time, too, there came someone round the corner of the house, dressed in ceremonial robes. The 2 dogs met him with great delight, jumping up before and behind in their joy at his coming. He ascended to the verandah and sat down. Immediately 5 or 6 multicoloured demons appeared and bowed before him, in front of the open space. The man then led the demons and the dogs 2 or 3 times round the house. They rushed up into the verandah and jumped down again into the court, backwards and forwards they came and went, till at last all of them mysteriously disappeared. The devils went into a hole underneath the floor, while the dogs went up to their quarters and lay down. The company from the inner room had seen this. When daylight came, they examined the place, looked through the chinks of the floor, but saw only an old worn-out sieve and a few discarded brooms. They went behind the house, and found another old broom poked into the chimney. They ordered a servant to gather them up and have them burned. The dogs lay as they were all day long, and neither ate nor moved. Some of the party wished to kill the brutes, but were afraid, so fearsome was their appearance. This night again they remained, desiring to see if the same phenomena would appear. Again at midnight the two dogs got down into the court and began barking up at the sky. The man in ceremonial robes again came, and the devils, just as the day before. The company, in fear and disgust, left the following morning, and did not try it again. A friend, hearing this of Chang, went and asked about it from Hugh and Haw, and they confirmed the story. There is still another tale of a graduate who was out of house and home, and went into a haunted dwelling in Inktown, which was said to have had the tower where the mysterious sounds were heard. They opened the door, broke out the window, took out the old harp, the spirit chair, the shoes and sticks, and had them burned. Before the fire had finished its work, one of the servants fell down and died. The graduate, seeing this, in fear and dismay put out the fire, restored the things and left the house. Again there was another homeless man who tried it. In the night a woman in a blue skirt came down from the loft, and acted in a peculiar and uncanny way. The man, seeing this, picked up his belongings and left. Again, in South Kettletown, there were a number of woodmen, who in the early morning were passing behind the haunted house, when they found an old woman sitting weeping under a tree. They, thinking her an evil bogey, one man came up behind and gave her a thrust with his sickle. The witch rushed off into the house, her height appearing to be only about 1 cubit and a span. Im Bang. End of chapter 36.